Hello everybody, this is a quick little video showing my thoughts on the new HEXBUG Battlebots Rivals Pack, Hypershock, and Rusty. Let's get into both the bots. So getting into Hypershock, and just first talking about how it looks, I think this is probably the best looking HEXBUG model that HEXBUG have made. It is absolutely beautiful. It looks just like the real one in the show. All of the panels look great, and I think it is one of the nicest looking toys HEXBUG has made so far. It runs very similar to how the Bite Force ran, where it is one drive motor for each side, but it's four-wheel drive, so all the wheels are linked to those two motors. And it has the one button controllers, those are back, and that activates the spinner with one click. And I would say, comparing this to some of the other vertical spinners they made in the past with like the Whiplash, the Witch Doctor, and the Bite Force, I think this may be the strongest out of all of those. It is pretty crazy how powerful it is, and it also has a lot of speed. Comparing it even to the LiPo-driven robots last year with Whiplash and Sawblades, it moves extremely fast, and I think it's really noticeable how much faster the newer models are compared to the older ones. So then getting into the other one, we have Rusty. In terms of detail, they did go for the Rusty that wasn't in this season, but that was of course because of issues and HEXBUG really couldn't plan for that. But looking at how that version was supposed to look and compared to this one, I think they did another really good job replicating it. Underneath the side guards, those treads actually look identical to the real one, and HEXBUG I think has just gotten even better and better at replicating it, so hats off to HEXBUG with it. Comparing the hammer to some of the previous ones like the Blacksmith and even the Sawblades, I think this is the fastest swinging and maybe even the most destructive hammer out of all the releases. It really does swing down fast, and it can knock off some of those panels of Hypershock, except for that top one, but that top one is on pretty tight. In terms of turning, it does struggle to turn a little bit, but that's also because of the treads. I do have one gripe though with the Rusty, and that's that the battery plate is absolutely horrendous, and it's a pain to get the batteries in and out. But other than that, it's pretty good. For removable panels, the two side tank tread guards come off of Rusty, as well as the back gray piece, but unfortunately not the helmet. I wish they did that, but unfortunately the helmet is not removable. And getting to Hypershock, two of the top pieces come off at the very back and in the middle, and the wedge, of course, pops off as well. I would say the top middle section is definitely the hardest to knock off, though. Getting to self-righting, Rusty can self-right when it is like that. It might shed some panels, but it does that, and it can also self-right at that orientation. However, it cannot self-right when it is flat on its side like this, because the hammer just can't really generate enough momentum to get it off from there, which is unfortunate. And getting to Hypershock, it doesn't have the self-righter, but it is able to drive around upside down, which is nice, so even if it does get flipped, it can still maneuver upside down and still hit with that spinner, which is great, and I'm super happy that it is able to do that. So now I'm going to show a little bit of footage of both of the robots in combat. Here are them both up against each other, and this is only me driving, and it is really annoying to fight these two robots against each other with one driver because their actuation is pretty different. But what I found against each other is Hypershock normally comes out ahead even after it's lost its front wedge. The issue with Rusty is that there's no ground game really with it, so whenever they hit and it hits the hammer, that kind of allows Hypershock to get underneath it and sometimes flip it over, but Rusty is still pretty good at self-righting, so most of the time it doesn't matter a whole lot. I think between these two, if you're fighting both of them, I think Hypershock is definitely the superior robot, because at this point, you see all of Rusty's panels have kind of come off. But I do think that Rusty's hammer is pretty powerful, and if it can line up a good shot, then it can definitely take off the top parts of some of the robots. Hypershock spinner is definitely one of the strongest in the line. With that wedge combination, whenever it can get under a robot, it can just launch them and flip them over. But once that wedge does go, that does leave it susceptible to getting flipped over like it did here against Rampage. But when that wedge is on, it may be one of the most effective HEXBUG weapons out there, and I really think that it's quite a beast. You can see here against horizontals and verticals, that wedge can come into play very well, especially against Blindside, one of the biggest spinners that we have. Its wedge works perfectly, and it even did this. Hypershock is the first robot to flip this new tri-bar blindside blade. Basically, when it hit the wall, blindside's blades stop, and it normally uses that blade's force to keep it upright, but when it's not spinning, that leaves it able to be flipped over. RIP. Getting to Rusty, the problem of course with the Rusty is that it doesn't have a ground game, which means that it is very susceptible to robots with wedges, so it can get flipped quite easily, but it is able to self-right very quickly, so it can get back in the match and land some good hammer shots. Hammer is pretty effective, maybe not the most effective HEXBUG weapon, but as a hammer, it's definitely one of the better ones. I do really like the treads on Rusty. I thought they would be like the Builder Bot ones and fall off quite a bit, but they stay on extremely well, and I don't think there would really be a case where they would ever fall off in a match unless you did something weird with them. The only real thing I think would change with Rusty, besides the battery box, is maybe keep those panels on a little bit better besides just the magnets, but overall it's pretty good. For my final rating, I'm giving it a 9.5 out of 10. I think these are some of the best looking HEXBUGs that HEXBUG has made. They've gotten so much better at replicating these robots. They work extremely well. I think they are second best behind last year's release with the Platinum Rivals, but both of the robots work extremely well with only a few minor issues. Hypershock is my favorite toy in the line now, if I'm being honest. I absolutely love driving it around, and I'm really excited to see what I could make and modify out of it. That's really all I have to say. These are available on Target's website right now. Eventually they will be on the HEXBUG website and the Battlebots store, but if you want to get them, I recommend looking at Target. Thank you guys so much for watching. We will see what we get next year.